The joke landed like a glass dropped on tile. Every shard pointed at me. My name is Mara Ellison, 34, high school counselor, lover of quiet mornings and well-made tea. On the night it started, I was sitting at my aunt's dining table in Ballard, the long window swallowing the last of the Seattle light. Wedding talk poured over the roast chicken like gravy, thick, constant, unavoidable. My cousin Kelsey was getting married in 6 weeks, and I had helped fold the save the dates, stamp envelopes, carry boxes of votive candles. I thought I belonged to the room. Aunt Joan topped off wine and said, bright as a bell, "We still need someone to wrangle the kids at the reception." She looked at me when she said kids. My uncle laughed. "Singles table by the kitchen, right, Mara? We'll keep you close to the coffee." Laughter rose, a little too relieved, like they had been waiting for the punchline to take its first breath. I smiled as if the sound did not cut. "Coffee suits me," I said. It was the kind of line you learn when you live alone and people treat your life like a half-finished sentence. When I stood to clear plates, I passed the buffet where Aunt Joan's phone lay open face down, a glow trembling under the black case. I didn't mean to look, but the screen lit and the preview banner flashed. Family thread. Make sure Mara wears something neutral. Don't need her single energy in the photos. A trail of laughing emojis and a sticker of a cat in sunglasses. I pressed my palms to the buffet's wood edge. Behind me, utensils chimed and chairs scraped on the tile floor. Aunt Joan's voice floated across. "Bring the lemon bars when you come back, dear." I carried the plates into the kitchen and washed them quickly, the faucet roar merciful. When I returned, Kelsey was showing everyone a pastel seating chart, proud, certain. My name, I could tell by the way she avoided my eyes, was in the far corner. It had to be in the far corner. "More tea?" I asked. "Always," my grandmother said. She was quiet that night, small in her blue cardigan, the one with a stitched garden trailing down each sleeve. Her eyes, though, watched everything. When I placed the cup in her hand, her fingers tightened for a heartbeat over mine. After dessert, I slipped on my coat. "Early day," I lied. "Freshman meetings." "Try not to adopt any more strays," my uncle said. "Boys or cats?" Laughter again. Soft practiced. I sipped my coat, breathed through the burn. On the porch, the night air felt honest. I stood and watched my breath plume white. I had learned long ago to carry things without letting them leave a mark on my face. Being single did not mean I was unfinished, but sometimes the world insisted on measuring me like a dress pinned for alteration. I thought of the wedding, all that lace and light, and of myself stationed near the kitchen door like a coat rack. I walked to my car and sat for a minute with the keys in my hands, the headlights off. When I finally started the engine, the reflection of my face in the rear view looked steady. Steady enough. In the quiet hum, another kind of sound stirred, low and precise, the kind you hear when something inside you clicks into place. Not anger, not yet. Only the first small tension, a wire pulled taut, ready to sing. The next weeks moved like rain, ordinary and unrelenting. The school year was winding down, which meant seniors left confetti trails of decisions behind them, acceptances, gap years, apprenticeships, and I collected the pieces. I loved that part of my job, the hinge moment of a kid finding a door they didn't know existed. Maybe that's why the jokes at home hit so precisely. They were closed doors masquerading as conversation. At lunch duty one Tuesday, a colleague slid a pastel invitation across the counter. "Bridal shower for Kelsey," she said, smiling. "Your aunt asked me to pass it along." The envelope had a wax seal with a sprig pressed into it. I broke it and found a card that said, in looping gold script, "Wear blush or sage." The address listed a winery an hour north. At the bottom, in smaller type that tried to hide, was a line, "Gifts from the registry only, please." As if generosity could be pre-packaged. At the shower, they sat me between two of Kelsey's college friends who spoke in a shimmer of shared stories I did not know. Someone passed me a box wrapped in peach paper. From the bridesmaids, a girl said, "Eyes bright with mischief." Inside was a mug printed with a cartoon woman and the words, "Future Cat Lady." Laughter rolled gently around the table, like a tide that pretended not to reach me while wetting my shoes anyway. I lifted the mug. Ceramic, I said. Good heat retention. I set it down carefully. Later, in the quiet of my apartment, I slid the mug into the cabinet behind my plain white ones, where it would hold nothing but the memory of restraint. 2 days after the shower, I found a florist invoice on the console table at my aunt's when I stopped by to drop off programs I had designed at her request. The programs were simple and elegant. I had stayed up late aligning the type, making sure the names flowed like a promise. The invoice had my name in the line-marked card on file. Aunt Joan had said she'd pay me back for the candles, for the stamps, for the last-minute printing. The running tab had become a path of petals leading away from me. Thanks for the programs, she called from the living room. We couldn't have done this without you. You're welcome, I said, and put the invoice back exactly as I found it. At school, I stayed late, and then later, writing notes for kids who needed more than a signature. Sometimes I stopped at the garden behind my building and pulled weeds whose roots looked like sieved lace. One afternoon, the custodian, Mr. Alvarez, saw me there with dirt under my nails and said, "You treat the ground like it's listening." I told him the ground always listens. He nodded like that made good sense. What I didn't say was that I was tired of being a quiet channel for other people's celebrations. I was tired of seeing my care stretched like a backdrop for someone else's portrait. I sat on the bench and watched a crow tilt its head at something I couldn't see. That night, the family group chat pinged so often I had to put my phone face down to keep the room from blinking. A cousin posted a meme, a bouquet exploding into cats. Someone wrote, "Mara, this is your nightmare wedding." The emoji again, the sunglasses, the glitter. I typed and deleted 3 messages before I did the truest thing I could think of. I turned the phone off. In that silence, I recognized a shape I had known all my life. Not a wall, but a gate I had never tried to open because the latch was tucked on my side. I sat in the dark long enough to feel the room settle around me, like a hand on my shoulder. Enough, I said aloud to no one and to everything. The word was small, but it did not tremble. It hung in the air with weight, and I felt the wire inside me draw taut and sing. I would not plead for a seat that did not need me. I would not audition for a role written without a line for my name. If I belonged, it would be because I built the table. If not, I would eat well in the garden alone. I did not know yet what any of that meant, but I knew what it did not mean. It did not mean standing by the kitchen door in blush or sage, waiting to refill coffee. The proof arrived in pieces, the way most truths do when people try to keep them pretty. First came the seating chart. I had promised to help pack favor boxes, because habit is a stubborn animal, and Aunt Joan still knew how to say please when she needed tape and hands. The chart lay open on the dining table, each circle a table, each circle sliced like a cake. Table 12, I read. Miscellaneous. My name sat with the DJ's assistant and 2 children listed as cowboy boots. Someone had scrawled by kitchen in the margin. I stood there a second, letting the ink become real. I took a photo of the chart, not because I planned to show it to anyone, but because the phone in my palm felt steadier than my breath. Proof object number 1. A cluster of names, mine a placeholder for an afterthought. Then came the message. I was delivering the favors to the venue a week later when Kelsey handed me her phone. "Can you text the caterer? I'm getting a manicure, and I don't want to smudge." Her lock screen bloomed with a notification as I reached for the number. A voice memo in the bridesmaid's thread. I pressed play without thinking. Laughter. Glasses clinking. Someone whispering, "Put Mara at the end, okay? We don't want the single vibe near the sweetheart table." A chorus of "OMG stop" that did not stop, only sharpened itself with softness. Proof object number 2. A laugh you hear when you stand outside the door. I sent the caterer the note about gluten-free options and handed the phone back. My heart did not hammer. It climbed down from its gallop and stood still, like a horse that has decided the fence is not worth jumping. Kelsey flipped her hair and said, "You're a lifesaver." Rehearsed gratitude like a ribbon. I nodded, a practice of my own. That afternoon, I walked home past the bakery where my neighbor, Evelyn Hart, was stirring batter at the front window like it was a spell. Evelyn had been a district court judge for 30 years and had retired last spring, saying, "I want to bake for people who do not fear coming into my building." She had a way of looking at you that felt like she saw both your alibi and your truth and loved you in between. She slid the window open. "You look like you need butter and sugar," she said. "I need something," I said, smiling. Over a lemon bar, I told her the outline. Not the details that would make me cry, just the lines that defined the shape. She listened with her whole face. When I finished, she wiped a crumb off her shirt and said, "My niece is marrying in August. Guess who's the officiant?" I blinked. You, she said. "If you want. Washington needs a simple online license. It takes 15 minutes. I've watched you talk to teenagers who think their hearts will break the whole world. You understand vows better than most clergy." The thought fell into me and found a chair. I did not think of white dresses or aisles. I thought of words spoken carefully and the way people stand when they mean them. "I could do that," I said, and felt my pulse nod. Evelyn reached under the counter and pulled out a small box tied with blue string. "One more thing," she said. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this." Her voice gentled, which meant the box held something heavy in meaning, if not in weight. Inside was a brass key and a folded letter on my grandmother's stationery. The letter said she had reserved the garden behind her church for me, "for any gathering you deem worthy, my girl," and that she had always believed the truest ceremonies begin with kindness. Proof object number 3, a key shaped like permission. I applied for the license that evening, the form easy, the decision not. In bed, I held the key on my chest and watched the ceiling blur. Suddenly, a picture arrived whole. The church garden, morning light, vows spoken under the cedar. Not Kelsey's vows. Not mine. Vows that would not split love into categories or make tables out of worth. I thought of the young couple from the shelter where I volunteered on Saturdays, Lila and Marco, saving for a certificate and 2 rings. They wanted something small, something real. We had spoken about it in whispers over donated coats and the gentle counting of socks. I texted Evelyn, "Do you think the garden could be used soon?" Her reply was a single word that felt like a door opening. Yes. The invitations I designed were simple white, a bevel of raised ink, my grandmother's garden in delicate outline at the bottom. The top read, "The wedding of Mara Ellison." It was not a lie. It was a ceremony entrusted to me, carried by my name. I addressed them to my family and slid them, one by one, into the blue mouth of the neighborhood mailbox. The wire inside me laid itself into a line. I would not explain. I would not argue. I would host a morning where love meant what it said, and I would let people choose whether to understand. Mist held the garden like a secret on the morning I unlocked the gate. The cedar smelled like rain, even though the sky promised sun. Evelyn set chairs in arcs of 6, her wrists efficient. Lila and Marco stood hand in hand under the arbor, their nervous joy a light warmer than any candle. I checked the microphone, the quiet kind that clips to a collar, and straightened the simple cloth on the small table where flowers would rest. Guests arrived in pairs and clusters. My grandmother came first in her blue cardigan, the garden stitched now by air instead of thread. She touched my cheek. "Proud of you," she said, the words a stone placed neatly where a foundation begins. Behind her, Aunt Joan in a dress the color of apology, Uncle with his tie tight as a lesson, Kelsey in a blush that felt like costume. Cousins fanned out, curious and underprepared. Kelsey hugged me, stiff. "You look wonderful," she said. "Is this?" She looked past me, scanning for tuxedos, scanning for the man they believed should complete the sentence of my life. I gestured to the arbor. "You're right on time." When they saw Lila and Marco, there was a ripple, a collective leaning back, like a tide receiving a boundary. Aunt Joan's mouth made a small, "Oh, Mara," she said quietly. "What is this?" "A wedding," I said. "A good one." The musician began the first soft progression on the guitar, the notes like warm breath. I walked to the arbor, stood at the small wooden lectern my grandmother had once used for bake sale receipts, and lifted my eyes to the chairs. Good morning, I said, my voice steady through the speaker. We're gathered to witness something simple and strong. I'm Mara Ellison, licensed to officiate in the state of Washington. Lila and Marco asked for a ceremony that belongs to them. We are here to hold that with care. I did not look at Kelsey or my aunt or anyone who had put me at the edge of a chart. I looked at the couple in front of me, whose fingers threaded like roots. I spoke about vows as promises measured in everyday tasks, laundry, patience, the bravery of asking the other person to stay when you are worst. I spoke about love that does not require permission to be important. During a pause, a robin sang from the fence, a sound so clean it felt like an answer. I invited Lila and Marco to speak, and their words were plain and true. When it was time, I said, by the power vested in me by the state of Washington, I pronounce you married. They kissed with relieved wonder. The guitar rose, and the small group clapped. Not a roar, a human sound. At the reception table, a simple spread of coffee, cake, berries. Kelsey approached with a smile that showed teeth but no warmth. So, she said, Ellison. Clever. It's a wedding, I said. The garden was available. I invited family. You let us think, she stopped. Her eyes were bright with something close to anger, but cooler. The temperature of embarrassment in front of people you believe are your audience. I let you read, I said. That's all. Aunt Joan stepped in, her heels quiet on the grass. This feels pointed, she said. The words were soft, but they had corners. Evelyn joined us, a plate of lemon bars in her hand like punctuation. It is pointed, she said, cheerful, towards the couple who are married. Uncle drew closer, lowering his voice to the authority he wore like a shirt. Mara, you made us believe. I made invitations, I said. You made beliefs. Silence held. Not the punishing kind. The kind that makes a person hear their own voice echo and decide if they like what it sounds like. Grandmother arrived last, the small gravity that ends an argument. She took a lemon bar and said, if you are embarrassed, perhaps you should examine what you expected to see. She turned to me. You officiated beautifully, dear. Kelsey's shoulders dropped a fraction. She glanced at Lila, who was laughing with Marco over a slice of cake cut too large to be practical. Some looseness returned to her face, the mask slipping so her real features could breathe. Congratulations, she said to them, measured, polite. Then to me quietly, you could have told us. I could have, I said. I chose not to. Why? Because you have been telling me who I am, I said. I wanted you to see who I am without your story around it. No one argued. The truth stood with its own posture. When the couple left through a tunnel of raised hands and petals, the garden returned to stillness. Chairs creaked. A breeze stitched the cedar to the fence. Justice fell into place like a stone laid flush with the path. Nothing to trip on, nothing to boast about. Just right. After the garden ceremony, life did not swerve into a new highway. It continued on the same road, only the lane lines clarified. At school, seniors posed for photos with acceptance letters, and I stood behind the camera when they asked, catching the angle that made them look the way they felt. On Saturdays, I kept volunteering at the shelter, the coat rooms smelling like wool and soap, the volunteers' laughter a comfort without edges. The family chat went quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that hums when people are choosing whether to speak with care or not at all. One evening, Kelsey texted me directly. Thank you for including us. No sarcasm. The period after each word felt deliberate, like she was setting stones in a path she wasn't sure she deserved to walk. I typed a reply and deleted it twice before writing. You're welcome. I hope you meant the congratulations. She answered 5 minutes later. I did. At my grandmother's, we drank tea in her small kitchen with its checkered curtains. A garden grows where hands return to it, she said, as if thanking me for something older than the morning I had unlocked the gate. She slid another envelope toward me, thinner than the last. Inside was the deed to the small side lot beside the church garden, signed over to me with her looping name. You should have a place to build the tables you prefer, she said, eyes bright, a little wet. I hired a carpenter, who loved cedar and clean lines. We built a pavilion with space for 30 chairs and a table that could be set for whatever ceremony arrived. Weddings, baby namings, memorials for pets, a community meal with no speeches, only the sound of forks and gratitude. Evelyn baked for the first event we hosted there. Lila and Marco returned, bringing a plant in a pot painted with their initials and a ribbon. "We wanted to help begin your garden," Lila said, her smile the soft certainty of someone who has found both shelter and sky. Aunt Joan and my uncle came to the third ceremony. They sat in the third row, the last to arrive and the first to clap. Afterwards, Aunt Joan hovered by the lemon bars until I stood beside her. "We teased," she said. The words scraped a little on their way out. "We thought it was harmless." "It wasn't," I said, my voice calm. "I see that now," she said. She didn't cry, and I didn't feel responsible for making her feel better. She put a hand on my arm for one breath and then removed it, a punctuation mark, not a claim. Kelsey asked me to meet her for coffee one morning before work. She wore a hoodie and no makeup, which I read as sincerity. "I'm sorry," she said, looking at the foam on her latte as if it were a compass. "I don't know who taught me to make jokes that need someone else's dignity in order to land." "I do," I said, and we smiled, the same family history passing through us like a weather system we could finally name. "We can stop teaching it." She nodded. "Would you read our vows before the wedding?" she asked. "Not for permission. For honesty." I agreed, and when I read them, I crossed out the lines with choreography and left the ones with work. At her wedding, my table was near the center. Not an apology, not a triumph. Just a table where my name sat like a person, not a category. I stayed for cake and dancing, and then left when my feet asked me kindly to rest. On a Sunday morning, months later, I unlocked the garden gate and stood in the soft gold of an early autumn sun. The pavilion held the aftermurmur of a naming ceremony for a baby whose parents had been told once to expect only losses. The coffee urn hissed. A cat wandered along the fence, tail high with a question only it understood. I picked up spent petals and folded chairs, hands working without hurry. The garden did not ask me to earn my place. It offered it and I accepted. Sometimes, when I stand there alone, I think of the invitations. The curve of my name pressed into bright white, the simplicity of the words that made people reveal themselves. I did not take revenge by showing anyone what they feared. I showed them what I loved, and let that be a mirror. It turned out that was sharper than any line I could throw. I do not know if I will marry.
I do not know if I will want to.
I do know that my life is not a hallway waiting for a door to open. It is a room with windows on all sides, and the light finds me even when the day begins unsure. I brew tea and bring chairs and say words that turn gatherings into ceremonies. I am not in the photos because I am at the lectern or behind the camera or clearing plates in a kitchen I chose for its soft light. There is a peace in work done with both hands. There is dignity in refusing to be measured by someone else's tape. And there is a particular sweetness in a morning where vows are spoken while the cedar breathes, and the only sound afterward is the tiny applause of leaves. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.